You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
December 1860, and much a to-do was made over Mary Todd Lincoln's shopping trip in New York City. It didn't hurt that her husband had just been elected President of the United States. Mary did not hang back from picking out whatever she wanted. According to one of her biographers, merchants were quite happy to extend credit to the future Mrs. President, and it was an undeniably thrilling experience for her, the fawning welcome of the city's leading citizens, powerful, wealthy, sophisticated New Yorkers. Since that time, if people talk about Mary Todd Lincoln at all, they talk about the shopping. In her first years as First Lady, Mary Todd Lincoln set out redecorating the White House. And she had $20,000 in those days that Congress had allocated for the task. And she purchased an extensive array of furniture, velvet hassocks, ornate washstands, patent spring mattresses, and intricate French satin delaine fabrics, sulfurino and gold dinner service adorned with the United States emblem, and a 700-piece set of Bohemian cut glass. The report simply filled the newspapers. A Washington merchant sent in a bill for 300 pairs of gloves ordered in 4 months. A New York department store noted that she bought furs, silks, laces, jewelry, and spent $3,000 for earrings and a pin, $5,000 for a shawl. Except it probably didn't happen. Newspapers started reporting more shopping than Mrs. Lincoln was even doing. A.T. Stewart's New York department store would have been one of the top destinations. Alexander Turney Stewart's retail empire begins with a modest dry goods store in New York in 1823. You're going to hear the term in the Arc of Commerce series a lot, dry goods. And what does it mean? And I mean, the easiest way to say it is they're not wet goods, right? They're not perishable. But what it really means in the 19th century sense is, first of all the items like fabric, sewing items that might be used for a home to do more clothing work, in addition to finished items of clothing, like shirts and jackets and ties and things like this. Usually separated from the term dry goods would be something like hats or bonnets or shoes, which would be more specialty items that would be named. But I suppose they could be considered dry goods as well. Dry goods stores were ubiquitous in almost any large American town. There would be a dry goods store. So he starts that way, and in 1823, he has a small shop on Broadway. He features Irish fabrics, domestic calicos, and he liked where he was. Stewart was somebody who didn't do what others did, was haggle and discount and either charge people too much or put himself out of business by giving too big a discount just to beat other stores. No, location, being on Broadway, would be what would determine his success. He wanted, in fact, the messy clutter of crowds on Broadway coming in and out of his store as a form of advertisement. Maybe they didn't all buy things. Now, have you ever had this experience? I know you have, even in 2024, where you walk into, say, a small store and you feel like the owner is just watching you from moment one, or they're even near the door. And it's nice that they welcome you when you come in, but they're sort of like, saying 3 times, "Can I help you? Can I help you? Can I help you?" All the way back in 1823, Alexander Turney Stewart sees this. And there's something more to crowds than just, whether they're going to buy or not, although you want them to buy. They're also marketing. Not only did Stewart pick a good location in the city, but he'd take advantage of location within his store. He'd display cases of merchandise outside the store to lure people in, something that's now so basic we wouldn't think about it. And between 1846 and 1848, he builds his Marble Palace, a 4-story Italianate marvel, a grand facade, Corinthian cast iron columns on the ground floor. The windows of the Marble Palace were massive French imported plate glass. Stewart's was a destination in and of itself, and people, including Mary Todd Lincoln, would come to see Stewart's and also shop there. He was the first in the United States, at least, to build this type of palace-like retail structure. He would not be the last. When Mrs. Lincoln visited, she was sure to see the second floor with full-length mirrors that allowed women to view themselves from multiple angles, essentially creating one of the first fashion show experiences in retail. Stewart specialized in European women's clothing, and Stewart tapped into his customers' desire for quality goods, but also to have an experience. In fact, when Lincoln's president, Stewart's already improving his store. He's going to build a whole new palace, an iron palace, to match the marble one. It covers an entire city block and features the cast iron facade as opposed to a marble one. I kind of like the marble one if you ask me, but come on, this is the 1860s. Iron is the thing. A glass dome skylight and a grand emporium layout that hosted up to 2,000 employees. Most importantly to what we're talking about was not the building and what it was made of, but the concept. The Iron Palace introduced the concept of stores within stores, departments, 19 departments or sections, each little mini stores. Silks, dress goods, carpets, toys. Customers could outfit their entire homes and their wardrobes, and also buy toys for the children. No need to leave the Iron Palace once you go there. No need to go to a store that wasn't Stewart's. The Iron Palace's innovative design included a rotunda which illuminated the store's interior and provided an airy, open feeling. Stewart did something else. See, when Mrs. Lincoln enters a store in New York or Philadelphia or D.C., generally speaking, there's no listed price. You would ask. The seller would name a price, and you would haggle. Good store clerks could make more money. So buying a dress or a curtain was like buying a car. Stewart didn't want that. He didn't want it to be like a car lot today. He wanted people to be happy and come back. And so he printed a price. It included a little bit more than the cost of the item. That was the price. So for Stewart, he's guaranteed a profit, and the customer is not being ripped off. His first salesman resigns upon learning that the price would not depend on the customer's wealth. In fact, he says, "You're going to go out of business." Stewart's always criticized with this, but they're wrong. He makes millions. For women, department stores like Stewart's represented more than a place to shop. It symbolized a newfound kind of freedom. Freedom from oppression. They were historically confined to the home. Now, they could enter these safe, elegant spaces without societal judgment. Just in the time we're talking about, Union Square in New York City becomes the beginning of what's called Ladies' Mile. A mile of various retail establishments. And it was okay by the culture of this time for women to walk up and down the street unchaperoned. They could meet friends and talk. They were also making economic decisions. Jean Painter Randall, another one of Mary Lincoln's biographers, said, "Like flashes on a screen are the frequent newspaper items about Lincoln's shopping trips to Philadelphia and New York in that first year." The reporters sometimes showed an excess of zeal. Mrs. Grimsley told of a pleasure trip to New York which she and Mrs. Lincoln made, in which they had not driven by any stores. To their amazement, the paper said they had been on an extensive shopping trip with the names of various stores listed. When attacked for the amount of shopping that she did, the New York Herald came to her defense, reporting that Mrs. Lincoln came to the metropolis, visited the most modish stores, and like the Empress Eugenie, who was suddenly elevated in rank, she displayed such exquisite taste in the selection of materials she desired, and of the fashion of their make, that all the fashionable ladies of New York were astir with wonder and surprise. Now here's the thing. It's not a defense that she requested, nor is it really accurate. See, Mary Todd Lincoln was not a babe in the woods, visiting the city for the first time, taken in by hucksters. Some mistakenly viewed her as a rustic from the West, but Mary was the daughter of a prominent Lexington, Kentucky native Robert Smith Todd, a politician in Kentucky and a friend of Henry Clay. Mary Todd was the fourth of the eventual 16 children of Robert Todd, born in her father's 2 marriages. He was a businessman, he was a politician, he provided his children with social standing, education, material advantages. In fact, it's only when Mary Todd visits a friend in Springfield and is taken with Abraham Lincoln and then marries him that she's introduced to a lower level of lifestyle, at least at the beginning, before Abraham Lincoln becomes one of the most famous lawyers in the state. Lexington, Kentucky was a developed town at this time. It was known as the Athens of the West, and the Todds were leaders in that community. She's tutored by a French immigrant and extensively educated. Yeah, one thing she might not have been educated on is a reasonable amount of spending. And while some of the newspaper accounts about her shopping might not have been true or negative or written by Lincoln opponents, there's some truth to it. By 1864, the bills for Mrs. Lincoln's shopping trips are personal, not just the money from the $20,000. The personal bills are catching up with her. Historian Margaret Leach wrote that shopping for her was like a drug for her tortured nerves. She indulged in her orgies of buying things. She complained to her seamstress that if her husband were defeated for re-election, I do not know what would become of us all. To me, to him, there is more at stake in this election than he dreams of. She was talking about all the purchases she made and that creditors had been perhaps forgiving, at least for a time, because Lincoln was in the White House. Her purchases for the White House exceeded the congressional allowance by over $6,000. She asks Benjamin Brown French, the Commissioner of Public Buildings, to persuade her husband, President Lincoln, to sign off on the extra bills. Lincoln, however, is outraged, and he calls it a monstrous extravagance and refused. He said it would be shameful to sign them. I'd rather just pay the bills. It would be shameful to spend on flub-dubs for the White House when Union soldiers were in need of blankets. Abraham was a little bit better at the politics, perhaps, than Mary Todd was. Department stores in this era transformed shopping into dignified, enjoyable experience for women. They were designed to be home-like. They would have comfortable lounges, private dressing rooms. Retailers like Marshall Field's, Chicago, or the Emporium in San Francisco would provide nurseries where children could be temporarily taken care of. The Yonkers Tea Room in Des Moines, Iowa, was a space of elegance and refinement, known for its high ceilings, elaborate chandeliers, and a soft, inviting decor. It becomes a cherished destination for residents, and it hosts everything from luncheons to fashion shows to weddings. The menu offered signature dishes like Yonkers chicken salad, the signature dressing, and the famed Yonkers pie, making the tea room about a community, about cuisine, about culture. It not only is a retail establishment there to kind of take money from Des Moines citizens, which many of them are happy to pay, but they're also increasing the value of Des Moines. The Younger brothers originally start their business in Keokuk, Iowa, so one brother would maintain a very small store while the others would go out and peddle in rural villages. Des Moines is the state capital now. And it's also a hub for industries, coal mining, agriculture, trade, railroads, machinery. It's also got a booming insurance industry. Against this backdrop, Yonkers Brothers flourishes, introducing modern innovations such as escalators and air conditioning to their department store. The tea room becomes a symbol of the store's stature, blending retail and social experiences.
Good morning and thanks for joining us on KCCI 8 News this morning. Weekends, we want to get right to the breaking news overnight. The Yonkers building downtown destroyed after a massive fire.
Give you a live look here at the old Yonkers building at 701 Walnut. This is where they have spent all morning battling this. The cause so far is unknown.
Now, sadly, the Yonkers department store, that building, had closed in the early 2000s.
And firefighters have been out here since about 1 this morning. Every floor inside, I'm told by fire officials, was engulfed by flames at one point.
There was a devastating fire, and you just see, I watched a news report of it, and the sadness that everyone has about this iconic building burnt down. So different from the buildings in Des Moines around it. But the good news is that something survived, and that's the tea room. And in fact, it just recently reopened. From George Stevens, a British writer in America, in Philadelphia, everyone goes to Wanamaker's. Now, the working of Wanamaker's, as I am informed, is this. It's no use going there to get what you want. You must go to get what Mr. Wanamaker wants to sell. He tells you each morning in the newspapers what he's got today. And if you want it, you had better go and get it. The chances are it'll be gone tomorrow. The head of each department is entrusted with a certain amount of capital and buys the goods at his own discretion. But woe unto him if he does not turn over his capital quickly. There is a rule that no stock may be in the house more than, I think, 3 months. After that, it must go off to sacrifice. But the really Napoleonic, I was going to say demonic, feature of the Wanamaker system is the unerring skill with which it reaps its profits out of the necessities of others, fixing its price according to the economic doctrine of final utility, taking no account of, that is, of the cost of production, but only the price at which most people will find it worth their while to buy. Mr. Wanamaker realizes 10% for himself, an enormous saving for the customers. A cargo of rose trees had been consigned from Holland to a firm of florists, which failed while the plants were in mid-ocean. They went to begging until Mr. Wanamaker bought them and put them on market about half the rate current in Philadelphia for roses. In 10 days, not one of the 20,000 was left. A firm which manufactured bicycles found itself without cash to meet its liabilities. Mr. Wanamaker bought it up. And what Stephen's point is going to be, however, for the next weeks and months in Philadelphia, the small retail shops nearly went out of business selling bicycles or roses or whatever it was. They could not compete with Wanamaker's. And so you see in there how the benign shopping, building or business can be seen as oppressive in two ways, maybe three. One is you're kind of forced to buy the things that Wanamaker has versus what you want. Your price is going to depend on what he thinks you can get from it, not necessarily what the item costs. And then thirdly, he's putting out of business smaller retail operators, slowly but surely, which will have effects on the city around and also will lead to lack of competition. Nonetheless, it was a fun experience, and Stephen talks about the French paintings that were on the wall at Wanamaker's store. Wanamaker's one of the few retail operators that also got involved into politics. So he was heavily involved in the Harrison campaign in 1888, and certainly a key campaign manager and fundraiser of McKinley's campaign in 1896, where he's urging the defeat of William Jennings Bryan with everything he's got. One of the things I saw that when Grover Cleveland wins in 1892, they said Wanamaker can go back to his discount counter. In New Orleans, you had department stores like D.H. Holmes, Godchaux's. Godchaux's, an immigrant from France, started as a peddler on the Mississippi River, establishes a store in Canal Street. In Omaha, Nebraska, the Zucker department store served as a cornerstone of the community. Again, it begins as a modest dry goods store. It has departments including women's clothes, men's clothing, shoes, furniture. The success of this store has been achieved only by giving greater values than could be had elsewhere. Our reputation for honesty is well established and has made us thousands of friends. What these department stores offered, and there's a little bit of rhetoric there, is that unlike some smaller stores or even other department stores, where they're going to rip people off, essentially, my words, or haggle. But usually in haggling, I know there are people that go to car lots and love it. They love buying a car. For me, I'd rather get it from, say, a Carvana, where you just order it and the car comes. Some people do well with the haggle, but most don't. Mostly it's the dealership that wins. They're just better at it. It's their job, after all. And so you see in a lot of these Stewarts or Zuckers, other places that start to appear after the Civil War, that there is a direct counter to that kind of multiple prices for different people model. On the lower level, if we talk not about department stores, you have the Woolworth stores, 5 and cent stores, which are also have prices clearly listed on each item. Those are smaller stores. Don't read this. Bernstein's in Omaha has this huge ad. Don't read this in big block letters. Don't read this unless you want to get something for nothing. So that we may become better acquainted, we are going to give each and every one of our customers that brings this coupon to us credit for 50 cents in merchandise. The only stipulation is that your purchase must amount to $5 or over to take advantage of this offer. We carry a complete line of wearing apparel for the entire family. Bernstein's, the big little department store that saves you money. 1806 North 21st Street, Omaha, Nebraska, next to Decatur. What'll also open up is the Cressage department store located in downtown Omaha. And in the 1960s, they innovate. And rather than using the Cressage name, they want it to sound a little more modern and represent that they are discount stores. The name they use is Kmart. I find myself on the sidewalk in Newark, New Jersey, my cell phone in hand, on Halsey Street, gawking at the impressive structure that's in front of me. I'm looking at the windows, I'm looking at the facade, I'm looking at the trimming around the windows, the geometric shapes, but also very ornate patterns. Most people aren't noticing it because you have to look up a bit. The ground floor of this building isn't so great, and the building is mostly closed now. There is, what will be ironic, a small dollar store in a small part of the ground floor of the building. It doesn't look great right now, so people are probably wondering why I'm here on the sidewalk, stopped, looking up and snapping a picture or two with my phone camera. As they, government workers, students, other locals are walking by using this street as a cut through. I get a good picture of the facade of this building. It's done in a style that's called Chateau-esque. Newark, New Jersey is not talked about a lot now unless you live in the state of New Jersey. In New York, it might even be an afterthought of some form. It does have the airport nearby, which is one of New York City's airports. It's almost disconnected from the city center. Newark was known for manufacturing in the last half of the 19th century. And if we're talking the 1890s, Newark's a big deal. It was the 14th largest American city. It manufactured products from leather to jewelry. It was also a rail hub. It was the way to get anywhere in New Jersey and to get to New York City's ferries. It also had a little chip on its shoulder. See, New York got the shoppers. New York had people taking the ferries there to go shop. Newark was making the stuff. But it was bought in New York. Felix Fold, Louis Frank, and Louis Bamberger wanted to change that. And they founded this store that opens in 1912, 131 Market Street, downtown Newark. It ranks, after an expansion, among the nation's top department stores. It's actually number 6 in 1929 in terms of size of department stores. And as I look up today, I see it because in the back of the store, they've expanded to go up a few more stories. That extension was built in the 1920s. At the time it's built, 1928, this store is making $500 million in revenue. in today's dollars. It's the fourth highest grossing store in the United States. It includes an entire city block, and still does. It's next to the old Bank of Newark building, right where you want to be in this city that at this time was featuring a lot of people coming in by rail and walking through the city streets. You can see how it fit over 200 departments across multiple floors. Customized linens, engraved jewelry, furs, other specialty items, but more. It housed a restaurant on the 10th floor. It had a Newark Public Library branch within the store, a U.S. Post Office branch. It was a central hub, not just for shopping, but you could also go and read a book or send your mail. He does something else in 1922. He launches WOR radio from the 6th floor of this store to promote radio sales. WOR is still a radio and TV station. Bamberger, like everyone though, is hit hard in 1929 by that stock crash and the resulting depression. He doesn't lose his fortune, but he does sell out to Macy's. And the name Macy's and Bamberger's is what's used on the store and in other stores in New Jersey for a while after that. In fact, when my mom goes to shop there in the late 50s, early 60s, it's Macy's and Bamberger's in Newark that she's going to. And they're making a day out of it when they would take their trips to Newark. But Newark hits hard times. There's the riots in 67, people moving out, no doubt. And in 1986, the store is rebranded as Macy's, and in 1992, the store closes. What killed it was not just the city of Newark and the direction it was going, although that's part of it, but it's also a trend that R.H. Macy had a hand in. So the owner of this Macy's and Bamberger's now in Newark had a hand in what would end up closing its doors. Starting in the late 40s, there's an idea, a concept, follow customers where they are. And they're no longer always in cities like Des Moines or Newark. They're in suburbs. So put the shopping there. And since space is abundant, and you've got to coax them to come, since now they're in cars and they're free to go where they want, versus locating things near rail hubs, you got to build something big. This is what happens with Victor Gruen and Elsie Krumrick. They're stuck in a snowstorm in Minnesota, and everything's closed. Everything's closed. And he said, what if there was one location where people could go and maybe it could be better taken care of, but climate controlled? It'd be something to do. He wanted a center, really a community center. Not just retail, but retail would be part of it. But you'd also have public services, libraries, post offices. But also a place where community members could meet and have clubs, things like that. Inspired by the communal atmosphere of his native Vienna, he wanted to make America more like Vienna. He didn't like, and this is going to be odd when you hear it this way, he didn't like that suburban, car-centric lifestyle, the 1950s, where everyone was driving to their destination and then driving home. What's happening to community in America? He imagines these centers as something where people could socialize and build community. Not just meet people, like you might at Bamberger's, but meet people that you didn't even know before you came to the center. He gets a willing customer, the Dayton family. Dayton family, if you know, are not only behind the Dayton's department stores, but also are the people behind Target. They're also the first builders of a mall, what will be called a shopping mall. Gruen doesn't use this term. He calls it Southdale Center. He wants it to be a civic space with a medical center, schools, and residences, too. Not just a parade of glitzy stores. It would foster human connection. He pitches the idea. It takes until 1954 for him to get approval from the Dayton family and start building, and it opens in 1956. It's 3 stories, 800,000 feet. It has 72 tenants, 5,200 parking spaces, and year-round climate control. This is Minnesota, after all. But the centerpiece of the whole thing was a garden court, designed to merge retail with art and culture and entertainment. And it's a success in some ways. 40,000 people attend the opening ceremony. 188,000 visited during the first week. Although celebrated, some criticized it, including Frank Lloyd Wright, who said it had all the evils of the village street and none of its charm. But people followed Gruen's work. Other people watching, in fact, people started building even before that mall was completed. But it's a little different for the others. And so when you have the Cherry Hill Mall in New Jersey or the Garden State Plaza not far from New York City, where New York City residents who have a car can travel to, retail is the focus, exactly what Gruen didn't want. But they do add wide open walkways, stores designed to dazzle. Initially it's open air, but it transforms over time to enclosed sections. I remember Garden State Plaza when indeed it was all open air. What's the anchor store for Garden State Plaza? Bamberger's. And the reason is, and I didn't know this at the time, but the reason is that one of the owners of the mall is R.H. Macy's. So Macy's, the owners of the department stores, were backing this new concept to give a platform to their department stores. And in that way, Macy's is more successful than others. For instance, there's a rival that Macy's has, you may hear the name, Gimbel's. And Gimbel's is a Midwest-based department store chain. But what they do is they say, okay, they're building this thing near New York City. We're going to buy one of your store locations and sell in your shopping center. No problem, Macy's says. The newspaper says that Gimbel's went shopping at Macy's and bought something. And they do. But guess what? Macy's, owner of the platform, will end up outlasting Gimbel's or any other, really, department store brand. Macy's today has about 520 stores. They've picked up all kinds of other retailers and acquisitions. They became Federated Stores, acquired a bunch that way. And then as Federated Macy's, essentially, they would end up buying Filene's Basement, Abraham and Straus, Bloomingdale's, the Broadway stores, Marshall Field's, Kaufman's. As I record this, Macy's is about to close 150 stores maybe in the next 2 years. But they're still leading the pack. And what I hadn't known before doing the research for this podcast is that part of the reason is they were, in some cases, the owners of the malls and placing stores in their own malls. Now, Gruen never got his idea. Although I will say informally, as a child of the 80s, that shopping malls became something of a community, and there was a lot of low-price social interaction that would occur. There was congregation of crowds, certainly, although sometimes mall security didn't exactly like that. And you may have the occasional mall that had maybe a church in it, maybe in the basement area, or some kind of community place where it could be a meeting. But it's not the center, I believe, that Gruen might have imagined. The center of the American shopping mall still was retail, even if they had a Santa display in the middle of the store. Malls are popular. Dixie Square Mall in Harvey, Illinois opens up in 1966 with great promise. Former golf course, and they build a sleek-looking modern mall. Good, like, mid-century look. $50 stores. Montgomery Ward is there, JCPenney, Woolworth, Walgreens. But this promise was particularly short-lived for Dixie Square. By the 1970s, Harvey, Illinois experiences economic decline, rising crime. The mall becomes a hub for violence. There's several murders and frequent robberies. They try a rebranding effort and a renovation, but stores continue to shutter. And by 1978, only 20 shops remain. The mall closes its doors permanently, and now it goes into receivership with the town. but the town isn't used to running a mall. The town decides, okay, we'll use it for a temporary school when they get a strange proposal.
You got us into this parking lot, pal.
To make a great scene for the movie The Blues Brothers. It's funny as all heck.
You get us out. You want out of this parking lot? Okay.
The Blues Brothers barrels through the storefronts and through the display cases in an iconic chase scene. But it leaves extensive damage. Universal Pictures actually faces lawsuits from the school district over the destruction.
Lots of space in this mall.
The mall falls into ruin. Vandals smash every window, thieves strip of it anything valuable, and nature starts to reclaim the site. Trees are sprouting through the crumbling parking lot, and rain and snow poured through the gaping holes in its roof. In 1985, Harvey builds a new police station constructed on the part of the property. But believe it or not, this doesn't do much to deter crime. Even with a police station right next to it, the abandoned mall attracts drug use and crime. Gang activity, homeless individuals sought shelter in the decaying shell, and fires, both accidental and deliberate, further ravage its structure. Finally, after decades of abandonment, demolition began in 2012. And this is a story in Harvey, Illinois that's a little bit a canary in a coal mine. Now that you're seeing larger scale malls being abandoned and closed and the like, it's not clear what to do with these big structures. You have some where they're actually exploring putting residential units in them, which is not a bad thing because housing's a big need. Office space isn't doing that well in real estate, so you have a few that are trying that. You have a few that turn into warehouses because they're big and they're big structure. As you said, this town tried a school but faced some infrastructure problems. In 2008, the Montgomery Mall in Alabama closes its doors after nearly 4 decades of operation. And over time, nature decides what it's going to do with the mall. And the floors become moss-covered, and cobwebs drape the fixtures, creating an eerie, time-worn atmosphere. It's always Halloween at the Montgomery Mall. In 2023, urban explorers Brian and Mitchell from the YouTube channel The Proper People ventured into the abandoned mall, and they capture its haunting beauty. It quickly goes viral as they walk through this decaying food court, like modern-day urban explorers. They find unused candy machines. They find a VHS tape with long ago forgotten about surveillance footage. The video becomes viral. In 1976, North Randall, Ohio welcomes the Randall Park Mall, sprawling shopping center, once celebrated as the world's largest. 2 million square feet of retail space, 200 stores, movie theater, even a 2-story carousel. And its grand opening is a significant event, drawing shoppers from all over the region. Upon its opening, the mall has 5 anchor stores: Sears, JCPenney, The May Company, Higbee's, and Horne's. Horne's was an American department store based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The Horne store, Joseph Horne and Company, originally opens in 1849 and will last until 1994 when it's taken up by Macy's. One of the best things about the Randall Park Mall is that when it opens, it has a 3-screen cinema. Three side-by-side auditoriums open up to the concession stand level. And there's a huge concession stand. Got to make that popcorn money. From 76 till 1994, it does quite well. But it's in 1994 when they realized the mall's occupancy rate is now 73%. Simon Property Group, Simon is a company that still runs malls. They buy it. Higbee's is renovated to a Dillard's. Horns closes. That they had been. Burlington Coat Factory takes the upper level of the Horn store. And the JCPenney store, once a regular department store, becomes a discount department store. There's an incident in 2003 where an off-duty police officer who was moonlighting as a security guard apprehends a suspect shoplifter and injured him by slamming his head on the floor. He dies in the hospital. Dillard's closed this store, partially because of this incident. For the next year, 50% of the mall is vacant. The mall will close. They'll announce that it's closing in 2008. The mall company owes more than $200,000 in unpaid property taxes to the town. They had taken out multiple mortgages on the mall. And the Randall Park Mall will be sold for an undisclosed sum to United Church Builders. There's different estimates, by the way, of how many malls are out there, depending on if you're counting like strip malls. There's at least 100,000 of those. But if you're talking about real tried and true malls, the estimates are 700 to 1,150. And by comparison to the 1970s, there were 30,000 of them. Here's from Coresight Research, a contrary view. The reality of the American mall landscape is more nuanced than the popular narrative of dying malls suggest. While headlines and media coverage are focused on that, top-tier malls are actually thriving. 2022 saw more store openings than closures for the first time since 2016. Here's an example that Coresight cites. Simon Property Group unveiled renovations to Phipps Plaza, a mixed-use destination in Atlanta, in late 2022. It included a Nobu Hotel, a restaurant, a Lifetime athletic facility, and a Citizens Market and Class A office tower. Okay, so you're providing within that mall space a lot of things that will sort of guarantee you a bit of an audience there. The mall at Green Hills in Nashville expanded and improved its facility so it could get luxury brands like a new Dillard's and also an opening of a store by luxury furniture retailer RH. All right, all that makes sense. Thank you, Coresight. We'll see, though. I think the trend is they might be a little more bullish on this trend than I think. But I think it might be funny to those who had celebrated stores like Zucker's or Yonkers or Bamberger's and maybe cursed that mall over there that's getting all that car traffic, driving people away from the city centers, destroying our city centers, to now see that the very malls that did that are also in that state of decline, and people are certainly children of the 60s, 70s, 80s are going to be nostalgic about that, about those malls closing and the experiences that they had there. So when I see the historians say that shopping was a drug for Mrs. Lincoln, I would just add that it's not just Mrs. Lincoln, it's all of us Americans. Some shop more than others, but we all like shopping. And now all that's happened is we went from small stores owned by individual proprietors to large city-based department stores to shopping malls to shopping online. And we're going to talk more about shopping online in a later episode in the Arc of Commerce series called Measure Everything that gets into computers. And that's one of my favorite episodes. That's coming up. Back to Mrs. Lincoln, though. Someone, maybe Mrs. Lincoln, maybe Mr. Lincoln, bought an interesting device for the Lincoln household in Springfield, a stereophone. And imagine that this is the way it was explained to me as a tour guide, which I thought was great. Abraham Lincoln was able to see the pyramids with this wonderful device that had two tubes with lenses in them and a cutout where you could place what are called stereographs. Two photos, almost identical photos, placed in a way that when you look through the scope, as Mr. Lincoln surely did, you can see the pyramids of Giza and exactly what they look like and be almost transported there. You can see cities on the East Coast, something a Midwesterner like Lincoln, who had probably at this point only seen New York, had only seen at this point Boston, would love to see. You could see new railroad cars, innovations in railroads and other mechanical technologies. You could see images of the presidents. You could also see a lot of jokes. You know, today, all these like funny videos, well, you'd have things like this, little funny stereographs that you would look at and see an image of a poor person who got rich too fast and they're wearing clothes that obviously don't fit them or don't match what they should be wearing. The inventor, or perhaps the perfecter of the stereoscope, is Oliver Wendell Holmes. This is the poet, Oliver Wendell Holmes, and not the jurist. Originally, at the International Exhibition in London in 1851, these stereographs are captivating audiences, and American photographers quickly adopt to this format. And they're specific, such as Langingham, William and Frederick, produced specific stereographic images of cities on the East Coast that are very popular. They're sold widely. Lincoln would have had a collection of them. The Library of Congress has some of these stereographs today. It would have been sold door to door or in drugstores or mail order catalogs, sold sometimes in box sets. Here's what Oliver Wendell Holmes says about the stereophone. We're looking into stereoscopes as pretty toys and wondering over the photograph as a charming novelty. But before another generation has passed away, it will be recognized that a new epoch in the history of human progress dates from the time when he who never but in uncreated light dwelt from eternity took a pencil of fire from the hand of the angel standing in the sun and placed it in the hands of a mortal. Notable producers like the Underwood brothers, who started in Kansas in the early 1880s, expand stereograph access by contracting photographers to create unique views from all over the United States. And they develop their box sets with supplemental guidebooks for educational use. They market them through door-to-door sales. They sell millions of stereographs annually. By the 1900s, Underwood and the Keystone View Company and others had taken stereography to a global scale. And today, the Library of Congress has over 52,000 of them. One thing's true in history. There is always stuff for you to buy. But you see how important this visual medium is in a time where you don't have movies yet. You do have photographs, but you don't have movies yet. And Americans can see things they never saw before, but what if they could hear them in a different way? And that's what Alexander Graham Bell and his assistant, Charles Sumner Tainter, are thinking about on a Washington, D.C. rooftop, which is also the roof of his library. Bell's assistant was 700 feet away, and all he did was shine various lights, and yet a sound message with no wires was accurately transmitted. On his dying days, he tells a reporter that this, what is to be the photophone, was my greatest invention. That's a pretty big statement from the inventor of the telephone. The Bell photophone that he liked so much resembled a telephone, but it used modulated light for wireless communication instead of electric signals through wires. This is how he described the operation. He used a plane mirror of flexible material, and it responds to voice vibrations, and thus altering the light's intensity just a little. The receiver has a photoacoustic effect, and a substance like lamp black is used to provide an effective light-to-sound transducer. What is all that gobbledygook? It receives the light, it changes the material in such a way that it's producing sound. Later iterations used selenium cells, which varied in resistance based on light intensity and increased the precision. They modulate electrical circuits and convert light back into sound, allowing the photophone to function as a wireless optical telephone. Yet, for all this ingenuity and this great thing that Bell invents, there's really no practical use for it. Nice invention. No practical use for it, other than to amaze people. Its use would be, by the way, adopted into today's fiber optics, at least this base technology. That's not going to last. But it will bring a famous family into the mix that will be very interested in it. So it turns out that the same basic concept, not the same technology, but science and copyrights were different then. The way you used technology was different then. So they're not exactly using Bell's technology, but RCA develops a technology that can bring sound to movies.
Hello, Betty. Gee, you must have been asleep. You didn't hear me knock. Hello. Right in, Mr. Winston.
So as you're getting into the 1920s, and the movie business is big, there are theater chains that start in the 1910s and go all around the country.
When you picked me for an agent, you made the wisest move of your entire career. An agent who never lays down on the job, you know what I mean? Oh, sure. I want you to meet Mr. Winston. Who? Mr. Alexander Winston. How are you? He seen your show last night. Yes, I know. I'm glad to meet you.
Where's your partner?
She just stepped out.
And I'm prepared to offer you and Miss Sloan $500 a week.
What?
$500 a week.
Did you hear that, Benny? What do you say? Gee, honey, you look like $1 million.
Do I? Turn around and let me look at your new suit.
And people are entertained by movies, and there's more places to see them. And so there's a drive to add that extra oomph to get people to the theater. The movies are silent when they first started, and I think silent movies are great, by the way. You can really tell a story more than you think, but it's a little boring, I guess, and it was in the 20s, so we decided we've got to develop ways to have the characters talking. And it's actually more of an evolution. If you watch TCM, you'll see there's a few movies where you have something where it's more, not quite a sound movie, but there is a corresponding soundtrack. So you'd have a record that would be playing along the same time as the movie, and it would be timed somewhat, but not perfectly. Not good enough to do dialogue, say, but it might be where you're in a crowded city street and you'd hear street noise. And that could be done before they had the talking picture technology. You might hear a horn honk where it doesn't have to be exactly, at a precise time, but just has to be around. RCA uses this old technology to come up with a way that when light is shined through the film, that it will produce sound. It records the sound as modulated light on film and converts it back during playback. Now, it only does it in mono, and so this technology is not what we use today, but it's exciting enough to be of interest to filmmakers. You see, at this point, if you're doing sound talking, it's such a new technology. It's kind of like AI right now, where there's probably going to be a point at which we don't even say AI anymore. It's just in every product. But you're in this phase where they're still making a big deal about the technology. So each of the movie studios that's making movies has their own sound technology. And so Gentleman looks to purchase the RCA photophone technology from David Sarnoff, big radio guy. He already owns movie studios. He owns 3 of them. He already owns lots of movies. He's produced lots of movies. He already has the business of exporting this great American product of Hollywood to the United Kingdom and being the exclusive exporter. And yet, nobody really thinks about him yet as a Hollywood titan. But he's getting to be more important there. And his name is Joseph Kennedy Sr. And yeah, I know it's probably surprising because we don't talk about much him as being in Hollywood. But it's really where the Kennedy family makes a good deal of their fortune. I know, there's also the stock pumping and dumping and insider trading and skirting the lines of everything that wasn't illegal at the time. And yes, there are rumors about him being a bootlegger. There's no real hard evidence of that. You have a couple of gangsters who are known to lie about a lot of things saying that Joe Kennedy Sr. was a bootlegger. Recently, one of his biographers really looked deeply at this issue and came up with nothing. What he did do is purchase a controlling interest in Film Booking Offices of America, a failing studio, merged it with RCA's technology to help him pioneer sound on film. It eventually becomes RKO Pictures. His tenure coincides with the rise of the Hays Code. This is after several incidents of a young actress is killed by Fatty Arbuckle, the Hollywood actor and other incidents that occur, and some things that are not true, some fake news that gets out there about Hollywood. All of this combines, and America's outraged by the loose morals of Hollywood. And so William Hayes comes in and sets a code of moral guidelines to clean up the film industry's tarnished reputation before they get regulated. Kennedy recognizes that the Hayes Code is a way to legitimize and stabilize the industry and even get better returns. And he assures that his actors, he's coming from the East Coast, he's coming from Boston, he's a devout Catholic. I know you people are generally Protestants, and I know the prejudice against us, but one thing you know is I'm a devout person. He doesn't say this, but this is the message. My actors will not commit any moral infractions. He gets Hollywood to come to Harvard, Harvard to invest in Hollywood, and he makes hundreds of films. These are B films. They're low profit. His biggest star is Gloria Swanson, who Kennedy has an affair with. Unfortunately, her film Queen Kelly drives her production company into near ruin. Kennedy is not. Kennedy leaves really after a 4 or 5 year stint in the movie industry, selling all his companies for millions. At the same time, he makes a brilliant move. Some would say he might have a gut or insider feeling, and insider knowledge. This from Joseph P. Kennedy Presents His Hollywood Years by Carrie Beaucamp. Since his Hayden Stone days, Kennedy realized that the attractiveness of a stock was a phenomenon often unrelated to the strength of the company itself. Even if a stock was on shaky ground, its stock continued to rise. And Kennedy had a weapon that you couldn't use today with today's SEC and all the regulations. That you could simply write letters to people and tell them that a stock was definitely going up. Pathé was an American film production and distribution company. Here's what Kennedy does as he becomes a manager of the company. His economy programs reached into every area of studio life, and no amount was too small to save. Low-level crew members and secretaries who were paid $35 a week and who had always stayed on the payroll no matter how few films were being made, now were being told to let go, and then a few hired back on a week-to-week basis. Even if Pathé was on shaky ground, its stock continued to rise, and while some observers called that unexplainable, it wasn't unexplainable at all. Letters were sent to current Pathé shareholders and others claiming that the stock was soon to move upward because of important information about to be released. Customers were urged to buy immediately to take advantage of the moment. Under the guise of being from a stock tip firm, these letters were sent from offices in Los Angeles and Chicago, but Boston was the city of origin, from an office on Milk Street at that. The method was shady, but still legal, and there could be little question that Kennedy was the source of the address to the Pathé stockholders as well as the content of the letters. It was second nature to him. Instead of investigating the story behind the mysterious rise in the stock price, the trades headlined, "Pathé shows profit under new management," and gave Kennedy the credit for turning the company around. The price of the stock had doubled since he had taken over, and it was simply assumed that it reflected the strength of the company. Kennedy knew better. While encouraging others to buy it, he was selling his first installment of 25,000 shares in small batches of 100 to 200 shares at a time through his bankers in Boston and in New York. This is all in 1928. He's well before the stock market crash. Some were sold under the Kennedy name, some went into accounts under the names of Ted O'Leary and Eddie Moore, but the vast majority was listed under Pat Scollard. It was Scollard who handled the paperwork. Beauchamp continues, there were few questions being asked about anything concerning the stock market, in spite of what in retrospect would be cause for concern. More and more people were buying in, and ticker machines were everywhere, in workplaces, ocean liners, and as Joe had, in private homes. Signs were hung in Hollywood offices warning, "Don't talk to your broker on studio time." Over at Warner Brothers, employees caught buying or selling during office hours were shown the gate. Stock market fever was so intense that Motion Picture News claimed the principal cause for production delays is simply too much stock market gambling. She notes this too. The first viable Catholic candidate for president had gone without Kennedy's support, and he implied to friends he had voted for the Republican Hoover. Yet while Wall Street was celebrating, Joe knew that Pathé was not alone having a stock price. I was not alone in having a stock price that wasn't tied to the actual value of the company. To the old banking examiner in him, the massive amount of loans translated into a dangerous rise in speculation, driven in part by a mystique that Kennedy himself had fueled and profited from, but never bought into. So we see in this, in her excellent book, is that for Kennedy, everyone else looks at Hollywood and sees glamour. Everyone else in the 20s was looking at the stock market and seeing a chance to get money. For Joseph P. Kennedy, both of these things were just temporary mechanisms to get rich. Not necessarily long, businesses he needed to stay in long. In fact, here's the deal. On November 21st, Kennedy signs off on the agreement to exchange his KAO stock options for RKO stocks. RKO goes up on the stock exchange. On the opening day, he sells 3,000 shares in a dozen small increments, netting himself $150,000 in profits. Over the next few weeks and months, using several different brokerage firms and accounts, Kennedy methodically sold off his RKO shares, paying $21 to exercise his options on the 75,000 former KAO shares he earned from his 5 months as chairman of that company. He sold them for between $35 and $52 a share. He sold his 37,500 former FBO shares, which he had been paid a maximum of $6 a share for the same amounts. Then there were the 12,500 shares of KAO. At a time, this is the best way to see it, as a time when a brand new Ford cost $460 and per capita income for Americans was $681 a year, Kennedy had cleared a profit of at least $4 million on the RKO deal alone. Sound changed the movies. Sound changed the fortunes of the Kennedy family. But sound was also a product. This guy, Monroe Rosenfield, is in New York City. He's staying at a hotel in the heart of the American publishing business. This would have been on 28th Street. Now it's like the New York Flower District, and even that, there's not too many flower places left. He describes the sounds of dozens of pianos played simultaneously. In just a few cramped publishing offices, just a few buildings, windows are open and you can hear this music. And they want you to hear the music because musicians are selling their wares to the various publishing companies. The publishing companies are making sure the public hears their latest song and goes to the retail stores on the same block and buy the sheet music. By 1900, royalties might earn an artist several $100s per hit song. It's not a lot, but it's considerable at the time, and for a musician, you're doing what you love. If you make a great hit, you can really make it. So Rosenfield hears all this and he says it sounds like a bunch of tin pans clanging together. And the name sticks. It's Tin Pan Alley. Pianos are common in American homes. I mean, it's said like 1/8 of homes have a person that can play the piano. That's not true today. This is a skill that would have existed in far greater numbers in middle-class houses, the ability to play piano. So to play the piano, you need sheet music to play. You can write your own songs, and people do that. And the sheet music comes out of that. But it's a lot easier to play someone else's music. The bustling music hubs of Tin Pan Alley were like lively centers of creativity, commerce. Songwriters, performers, song pluggers were plugging their songs They would demonstrate new tunes. Every music store would have a piano there. Artists like Irving Berlin, Harry von Tilzer, make some big publishing agreements. But often, probably artists are offered about $100, $200. That's what happened to Charles K. Harris in 1892. He writes a song called After the Ball. But when they offer him $100, he says, no, I'm just going to publish it myself. Yourself? That's unheard of. It sells over 5 million copies. One Jimmy Walker, the dapper mayor of New York City, dabbles in songwriting and has a hit with Will You Love Me in December as You Do in May. This from Once Upon a Time in New York. The words of the song were apparently directed at Janet Allen, a pretty young singer he had met while playing piano in amateur theatricals. The diminutive Miss Allen, Walker called her Allie, was little more experienced in show business than the aspiring law student. She had once played a chorus girl and understudied the leading lady in The Duke of Duluth, a Broadway production. Jimmy Walker played the piano. Janet sang all his songs. Jimmy earned $10,000 in royalties from the sale of sheet music and spent much of it on his wardrobe. Already he was wearing custom-made suits, shirts, and shoes, sporting a walking stick. After 6 years, they became engaged, but Walker was in no hurry to get married. He was at the start of his 16-year career as a legislator, a job handed to him by virtue of his father's Tammany connections, traveling to Albany and then enjoying its bachelor opportunities. He was effective as a speaker and learned how to compromise with both upstate Republicans and downstate Democrats. He was married in 1912 in St. Joseph's Church in New York. Jimmy arrived 2 hours late. He blamed a mishap involving his best man, who was carrying the wedding ring, and horse-drawn fire engines. The best man was a fire buff, the story went, and was sidetracked by a fire on the way to the ceremony. He would be famous for his lateness. He was credited with having kept President Calvin Coolidge waiting for 40 minutes while on a visit to Washington. A wisecracking columnist wondered if Coolidge knew the difference. After the meeting in the White House, Walker had an appointment with Andrew Mellon, the Secretary of the Treasury. He showed up an hour late. Disdainfully, Walker said, "I refuse to live by the clock." Elected mayor at the age of 45 in 1925, Walker wore the big town's heart on his hand-tailored sleeve. He was a dude for all seasons, who always dressed to kill. The sidewalks of New York resounded beneath his pointy-toed black shoes, which were carefully cradled in 4-button gray spats. He loved to lead a parade up Fifth Avenue or any other street where the crowds could cheer him as he smiled and waved his shiny silk topper. Jimmy Walker's wardrobe was very much a part of his personality and theatricality in office. He changed his outfit 3 times a day, twice during office hours and once again for his nighttime activities. Various matching outfits were parked in various places for quick changeovers. His tailor shop at the Ritz-Carlton, at City Hall, and wherever he slept that evening. Ever since he entered public life before the Great War, Jimmy Walker had employed a private tailor who cut his suits to order. Before World War II, the action moves over to the Brill Building. It's one building, but it has a large number of rooms and 165 separate music businesses in this one large building. And they have something called the Brill Building sound, even though not everyone playing in that way is in the Brill Building. Here's how Carole King described what was going on in the Brill Building. "Every day we squeezed into our respective cubbyholes with just enough room for a piano, a bench, and maybe a chair for the lyricist, if you were lucky. You'd sit there, and you'd write, and you'd hear someone in the next cubbyhole composing a song exactly like yours." The pressure in the Brill Building was really terrific, because Donnie Krishner would play one songwriter against the other. He'd say, "We need a new smash hit," and we'd all go back and write a song, and the next day we'd each audition for Bobby V's producer. But the line was clear in the Brill Building. People like Carole King wrote the songs. Others sang the songs. When Bob Dylan releases his record, he aims to change that. One of the things he'll say is, I'm the one that ended Tin Pan Alley. And what he meant by that is a songwriter could now sing the songs. Carole King also joins him in that. Songwriter can now sing the songs. John Denver can sing his songs. And you're hearing the original artists singing their original music. December 2020, Bob Dylan sold his entire songwriting catalog. Bob Dylan's collection is more than 600 song copyrights spanning 60 years, including Blowing in the Wind, The Times Are Changing are the big ones. The value that he earned was $300 million. I'm glad that all my recordings can stay in Columbia, where they belong. So said Bob Dylan. I hope you enjoyed this extra episode of the Arc of Commerce. It's for patrons only at this point. Maybe you're listening to it later and I might have released it. I don't plan to do it in the time of this. This is really a special. Thank you so much for your support. I will have more episodes that I'm adding to this Arc of Commerce series as we release it. I want to thank you for listening.